877-876-8893. That's 877-876-8893.
Thank you that you truly are American Family Radio.
If the failing New York Times has an anonymous editorial, can you believe it? Anonymous.
I think the president has people around him who are disloyal to him. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
When you tell me about some anonymous source...
Twitter undertook no behavior to selectively censor conservative Republicans.
How can you not remember whether or not you had a conversation about Robert Mueller or his investigation with anyone at that law firm?
You asked me that. I need to know who works there.
I think you can answer the question without me giving you a list of all employees of that law firm.
Well, actually, I can't.
Why not?
Because I don't know who works there.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
And good Thursday afternoon, everyone. Fred Jackson sitting in for vacationing Brian Fisher, who'll be back in the chair on Monday. We sure hope Brian's taking a well-deserved vacation, a nice break. But I got a feeling, knowing Brian Fisher, that he's keeping up with the news of the day.
Oh, yeah, he is. He is. I've been seeing the posts, and Twitter's been going, yeah.
Yeah, take a break, Brian.
I know.
It'll all be here when you come back. But we're going to try to take care of things today. And I'll tell you what, as you hear on Brian's show every day here in Focal Point on American Family Radio, chaos in Washington. You know, I was talking with one of our vice presidents this morning, Ed Vitagliano, and I think everybody in our audience is familiar with Ed. What we are seeing in Washington, D.C. today is really a reflection of the spiritual warfare that's going on in this country. So, you know, we do not disconnect the stories that we talk about each day here at American Family Radio with spiritual warfare. It's all part of what's going on. And honestly, as Ed Vitagliano was putting it on today's issues earlier today, this great divide that we are seeing politically in our country, which really erupted into the degree that we have seen since Donald Trump became president of the United States. It really has to do with a biblical viewpoint where you are and looking at our world today, and versus and I'm not saying that President Donald Trump represents all of Christianity and biblical values all the time. But what I am saying is that he represents values that, and what I'm talking about here, he values the life of the unborn. That's one thing. Yeah. He values religious freedom and speaking up for the right of conservative Christians to have their point of view expressed in the public sphere. He is speaking up, I believe, President Trump is, for the Barronelle Stutzmans of this world who have faced persecutions. He's the florist from Seattle who basically the Washington state government and even to a certain extent federal courts have ruled against her because she wouldn't sell flowers for a homosexual wedding. The Jack Phillips case in Colorado, very similar. The case of the bakers in Oregon, the same way. He speaks up for them. And to a certain extent, his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who he has disagreements with from time to time, has followed in pursuit of that. The Democrats on the other side are still very much into Barack Obama's agenda. And that is a very anti-Christian, a mockery of conservative ideals. We've talked about, Barack Obama and when he was taped, and people, conservatives, those who cling to their guns and their Bibles. Mm-hmm. Hillary Clinton talking about deplorables. So all of that has been brewing over the last several years, and it has just burst forth since Donald Trump became president. But it's been on display again in the last 48 hours in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And what we are talking about, folks, is the Senate Judiciary hearing for President Trump's latest nominee to the United States Supreme Court. He is Judge Brett Kavanaugh. And what you've seen on display, there is no secret about this. The Democrats don't even want to vote on Kavanaugh, at least before the elections in November. And so they're doing everything possible to try to derail even a vote on that nominee. And I think it reached a point this morning where a Democrat senator, he is Cory Booker from New Jersey. He's a man who wants to be the next president of the United States. There is no question about it. He made the decision to make public documents that were deemed to be confidential, not for public viewing. They were meant as background for all senators, Democrats and Republicans on that committee, to use as background to ask questions of the nominee, Judge Kavanaugh. But Cory Booker announced this morning that he was going to make those public. Now, for the most part, these are documents, correspondence, which Brett Kavanaugh, when he was working for the Bush administration back from 2001 to 2006. So these are confidential memos back and forth between then President Bush. Remember, these are the days in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attack in this country. All right. So what you're going to hear next is Senator Cory Booker announcing that he's making these documents, which have a big stamp on them, confidential. He's releasing them to the public. And you're also going to hear Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas responding to this. It's cut number 9.
I knowingly violated the rules that were put forth, and I'm told that the committee confidential rules have knowing consequences. I'm going to release the email about racial profiling, and I understand that the penalty comes with potential ousting from the Senate. And if Senator Cornyn believes that I violated Senate rules, I openly invite and accept the consequences of my team releasing that email right now. We're rushing through this before me and my colleagues can even read and digest the information.
Running for president is no excuse for violating the rules of the Senate. No senator deserves to sit on this committee or serve in the Senate, in my view, if they decide to be a law unto themselves and willingly flout the rules of the Senate and the determination of confidentiality and classification. That is irresponsible and conduct unbecoming a senator.
All right, so there you have it. We don't know what's going to happen to Senator Cory Booker. If I was a betting man, I would say, unlike the rules allow, he will not be thrown out of the Senate. We just don't have Republicans that are willing to do that. Despite the fact that you heard Senator Booker there admitting, I've broken the rules. He doesn't care. And what this was all about, folks, just so that you're aware, this memo that Booker released this morning had to do with correspondence involving then Kavanaugh, an employee of the White House in the Bush administration, in the days and weeks just following the 9/11 terrorist attack in this country, as to what authorities would do to try to screen to prevent another terrorist attack. Kavanaugh noted in that email, in that note, on his perspective on whether, that there would be racial profiling of certain individuals. And let me just read some of that email. When he's working as a lawyer in the Bush White House, he generally favored race-neutral security measures, but said they need to grapple with the interim question of what to do before a truly effective and comprehensive race-neutral system is developed and implemented. All right, so what Kavanaugh was saying, I don't favor racial profiling, but these are extraordinary days. Remember, this in the weeks following 9/11. And Al-Qaeda's repeated modus operandi of doing a series of terrorist attacks back to back. And what he was wrestling with in that was, do we bring in some profiling that he normally wouldn't favor in order to protect the security of the country? That's what he was talking about. But Cory Booker's trying to paint Kavanaugh as a racist. That's what he's trying to do. But you have to have all of that context, and Booker hasn't given us that context. But there it is. All right, we're going to talk a whole lot more about this. Is this anarchy that we're seeing on display in Washington? We'll talk more about it when we come back here on Focal Point.
Hello, I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. For the last 2 years, we've just had tremendous response, early response to the announcement that we're going to Israel on a Holy Land tour. We're going March of this year. We go March of every year. Last year we filled up like early fall, and I expect us to fill up early fall this year as well. So if you're interested in this March 14th through the 22nd tour, and you'll be going with primarily supporters of AFA and AFR, just get the brochure and check it out. You can call us today at 800-FAMILIES, 800-FAMILIES, option 5, and leave us your name and your address, and we'll mail you a brochure. If you simply want to go online, all the information is there. It's at twholyland.com, twholyland.com. If you want to go in March, we're filling up, and we're filling up fast, so check it out, twholyland.com.
A lying tongue hates its victims, and a flattering mouth works ruin. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. The incumbent Democrat governor of New York is being attacked from the left in the Democrat primary by actress Cynthia Nixon, similar to the way Bernie Sanders attacked Hillary Clinton in 2016. Things got rather testy in their primary debate, where Cuomo made things a little harder for himself. He asked Nixon to stop interrupting. She accused him of lying. He then responded that he would stop lying when she did. You kinda just admitted lying. Nixon, a left-leaning Bernie Sanders type who embraces all things regressive, and Cuomo, another regressive who admitted lying publicly. Oh, New York.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
And welcome back to Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian today. We're talking about the proceedings in Washington, D.C. This is day 3 of the Senate confirmation hearings for the latest nominee from President Trump for the United States Supreme Court, Judge Brett Kavanaugh. He is really held up well under the kinds of questioning. We talked about this yesterday. On day 1 of those hearings on Wednesday, over 70 people arrested. Orchestrated protesters. As we reported yesterday, some of these protesters were seen taking money for what they were doing outside of the hearing room. And yesterday, or today, already there's been more protests. So this is all part of a campaign.
You know what kind of made it obvious that it was an organized protest going on is you could see how it would happen. It was very similar to what the senators were doing. One would be interrupting. Mm-hmm. They'd shut that person down. Another one would start. Same thing in the gallery there. A protester would start up, security would take them out, and then another one would start. And with no security, they'd have to walk one out, come back in, walk them out, and you'd see another one, and one after another.
Yeah,
it's like they were going in turn.
Yeah, the hearings actually started on Tuesday. My mistake. I said started Wednesday. It started Tuesday. There are about 70 people arrested Tuesday, another 70 arrested yesterday. And I watched some of the proceedings. You're exactly right, Jeff. This was all planned. Remember, we reported way back on earlier this week that there was a phone call on Sunday night involving Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, which these tactics were talked about. Yeah. So this is all orchestrated. And I do believe we are approaching a certain degree of anarchy. Now, I'm not willing to call it treason at this point with what Cory Booker did this morning, breaking Senate rules and releasing to the public these documents which were stamped committee confidential. And I want to mention one more thing, and we're talking at Battagliano on today's issues earlier this morning. The Republicans have released tens of thousands of documents to the Democrats in advance of the hearings this week. They want another 40, 50, 60,000 documents released. If you add up the number of documents that have been released and the ones that they want released, that would be more than all the documents that were put together for Republicans and Democrats for the last 5 Supreme Court nominees.
Wow. Wow.
So this is the kind of ridiculous activity that's going on that the Democrats are doing. So Cory Booker releases, I think it was a total of 12 pages of emails today that were marked committee confidential. Now listen to this. He's not alone. Among those voicing publicly support for what Cory Booker did this morning, Illinois Senator Dick Durbin and Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar both threw their support behind Booker. Here's what Durbin had to say. I completely agree with you. I concur with what you are doing. So if there is going to be some retribution against the senator from New Jersey, count me in, Durbin said. Klobuchar, much the same. We support what Senator Booker is doing here. So this is really anarchy. And I want to draw your attention. They're saying that the Republicans are trying to hide information, and this is a terrible, terrible thing. I want to remind people, let's go back to 2009 when Barack Obama gave us Obamacare. Over 2,000 pages long, Obamacare. Remember the vote in the House? Do you remember what our good friend Nancy Pelosi said? If you want to find out what's in this bill, pass the bill. Over 2,000 pages long. I was reminded this morning also that these interim budgets that keep being passed, those are thousands of pages. Members of the House, they even admit they don't get a chance to read it. But everybody's okay with that. Now, all of a sudden, Cory Booker, Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, I repeat again, he wants to be the next president of the United States. He gets up there and says it's all important to the American people. He says, I'm doing this for the American people. I'm going to break the rules. I'm going to release confidential documents to the public, which we now know were part of the general discussion back in those days, in the weeks following 9/11. Let's be mindful of that, of the period of time that we are talking about. But Cory Booker is simply, he's trying to paint Judge Brett Kavanaugh as a racist. That's what he's attempting to do. All right, he's not the only one. California Senator Kamala Harris, another Democrat who wants to be the next president of the United States. She also sits as a Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Last night, these hearings went in late into the night, and they'll likely go late into the night tonight, all right? She was questioning Judge Kavanaugh on whether he had had a conversation with a particular legal firm in Washington, D.C., that related to the Mueller investigation. Did you have a conversation with a lawyer who works for this firm? Now, we're going to hear the exchange here, all right? We're going to hear the exchange. You'll also hear the voice of Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah coming to the defense of Kavanaugh. So she's really badgering Kavanaugh on this question. Listen to what he had to say, and then I'll come back with a little bit more information on this legal firm that she is questioning about. It's cut number 5.
Have you discussed Mueller or his investigation with anyone at Kasowitz, Benson, and Torres, the law firm founded by Mark Kasowitz, President Trump's personal lawyer? Be sure about your answer, sir.
Well, I'm not remembering, but if you have something you want to...
Are you certain you've not had a conversation with anyone at that law firm?
Kasowitz, Benson.
Kasowitz, Benson, and Torres.
Well, is there a person you're talking about?
I'm asking you a very direct question, yes or no. It's a really specific question.
I would like to know the person you're thinking of, because what if there's...
I think you're thinking of someone and you don't want to tell us.
I'm not sure I know everyone who works at that law firm.
I don't think you need to. I think you need to know who you talked with. Who'd you talk to?
I don't think I'm not remembering, but I'm happy to be refreshed, or if you want to tell me who you're thinking of who works.
Are you saying that with all that you remember, You have an impeccable memory. You've been speaking for almost 8 hours, I think more, with this committee about all sorts of things you remember. Yeah. How can you not remember whether or not you had a conversation about Robert Mueller or his investigation with anyone at that law firm?
You asked me that. I need to know who works there.
I think you can answer the question without me giving you a list of all employees of that law firm.
Well, actually, I can't.
Why not?
Because I don't know who works there.
Now, here's some important information into all of this. There are over 300 lawyers who work for that firm. They have 9 offices across the country. It's an absolutely huge law firm. It could be that one day in a line waiting for coffee, he had a conversation or was seen having a conversation with a lawyer that he didn't know worked for that particular firm. And that particular lawyer may have said, hey, what do you think about the Mueller investigation? Stuff like that happens. But this was an attempt to do a gotcha. Yep. But I like the way Judge Kavanaugh handled himself. He did not back down. You got to tell me. You say I had a conversation. You're making the allegation publicly that I had a conversation with some lawyer for this firm that has some attachment for a lawyer that worked for Donald Trump. So just tell me who. I think if she had named somebody, he would have said, okay, wait a minute, I know George Smith. Yeah, I may have a conversation with him. We were just, chatting about the Mueller investigation in general. But he has to know who the person is. By the sounds of it, he wasn't even sure of the law firm. There are dozens and dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of law firms in Washington, D.C. But this is the kind of garbage that Kavanaugh has been facing during these hearings. It's just absolutely amazing. If the shoe was on the other foot, this was all reversed, and it was a Democrat chair of that committee. Number one, I think Booker would be off. If a Republican did what Booker did this morning, releasing that confidential email, they'd be out the door right now. You also wouldn't see all those protests that you've seen. Over 140 people arrested in the last few days. This is all very much orchestrated, and some people are rather frustrated with the Republicans. Senator Grassley is the chairman of this committee, and some people say he's allowed the Democrats to go too far in all of this. He should bring the gavel down, that's it. If you guys don't want to do this the way it should be done, then we're done. It's as simple as that. But as we mentioned yesterday, and I mentioned again today, this is all part of a campaign that was put together, organized, under the direction of Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. So we're going to see more of this as the day rolls on. It is possible, if they go late into the night tonight, that this could wrap up. I think it's scheduled for 4 days, these hearings with Judge Kavanaugh, with some kind of confirmation vote between now and the end of this month. That's where we are. But even his enemies, it's really quite interesting, Kavanaugh's enemies have admitted, and there was a headline this morning, I believe in an Associated Press story, that that basically said he has held up extremely well, that they haven't been able to do the gotcha thing with him. And so he's a pretty cool customer, and thank goodness for that. But the Democrats are going to continue to do everything that they can, I think, to try to derail things. But so far, he's held up very well. We'll see what happens. I tell you what, on top of that, on all of that happening, you have this New York Times editorial, which came out yesterday. I want to review some of what was said in that editorial from the so-called anonymous source, high-ranking official in the Trump administration, all right? So this editorial in the New York Times. I want to talk a little bit about that, but also what has happened in the wake of all of that and President Trump's response. All right, you're listening to Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian Fisher today. A lot of news out there today. We'll be talking about this op-ed, plus other things that are happening. An update on the police shooting of that Australian woman in Minnesota. Some documents have been released on that police officer. I want to talk to you a little bit about that, too. All right, Focal Point back right after the break.
This is Dr. Richard Lamb, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. It has just been made public that in the new movie First Man, a biopic about Apollo 11 astronaut Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, the scene where Neil Armstrong and his partner Buzz Aldrin plant an American flag on the moon's surface is omitted. Ryan Gosling, the Canadian actor who plays Armstrong in the movie, said he viewed it more as a human achievement rather than an American one. Really? Gosling is a fine actor, but he is an ignorant twerp when he starts spouting off nonsense like that. It was Americans, tens of thousands of them, who put a man on the moon with massive effort, expertise, and sacrifice. 3 American astronauts died preparing to achieve this remarkable feat. The space race between America and the Soviet Union was deadly serious, and anyone who lived through that time knows it down to their bone marrow. The Soviets claimed putting the first satellite in space, Sputnik, proved that the Soviet communist system was a superior system, and the U.S. felt the challenge. As Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who was the head of the space program, put it, quote, "Failure to master space means being second best in every aspect in the crucial area of our Cold War world. In the eyes of the world, first in space means first, period. Second in space is second in everything." Apollo 11 was marinated in patriotism. The lunar module was called Eagle, and the command module was called Columbia. There was some discussion about putting up a UN flag, but it was quickly nixed. It would be an American flag and only an American flag. As one who lived through that time period, let me tell you how I felt. I was sitting in my parents' backyard, having just watched the landing on the moon, and I looked up at the moon and I thought, we beat those lousy Russians to the moon. And it was a really good feeling then. It's a really good feeling now. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio. Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net. afa.net.
And welcome back to this Thursday edition of Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian today. A little confused on the days of the week because of Monday. Yeah. Not complaining about Monday being off, but every day seems to be one day behind. But we've been talking about what happens at the Senate Judiciary Committee this morning. These are the hearings, of course, for President Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court, Judge Brett Kavanaugh. And this morning, the highlight coming out of it were claims from Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, that he had decided that he was going to make public emails, documents that Judge Kavanaugh wrote when he was a member of the staff of the George Bush administration, the White House, back from 2001 to 2006. We played a bit of the audio from the hearings this morning. You're going to hear, and I want to play it again just in case you're joining us just in the last 10 minutes or so. What you're going to hear is the voice of Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, and a response, him talking about him deciding to go ahead and release these documents, 12 pages in total. And you'll also hear a response from Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas. Go ahead.
I knowingly violated the rules that were put forth, and I'm told that the committee confidential rules have knowing consequences. I'm going to release the email about racial profiling, and I understand that the penalty comes with potential ousting from the Senate. And if Senator Cornyn believes that I violated Senate rules, I openly invite and accept the consequences of my team releasing that email right now. We're rushing through this before me and my colleagues can even read and digest the information.
Running for president is no excuse for violating the rules of the Senate. No senator deserves to sit on this committee or serve in the Senate, in my view, if they decide to be a law unto themselves and willingly flout the rules of the Senate and the determination of confidentiality and classification. That is irresponsible and conduct unbecoming a senator.
So, listening to Senator Cory Booker in that hearing this morning, you would come to the conclusion that he got up this morning and he decided, despite the possible consequences that I could be thrown out of the Senate for this, I'm going to go ahead and do it. Because I think he even said that, I think this is a Spartacus moment.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it turns out there's another part to this story. And joining us now, this is just breaking news, folks, is newsman Steve Jordahl from American Family News. Steve, you're watching this. Turns out it wasn't quite the way Senator Booker portrayed for us this morning.
There was another shoe to drop, and I guess this might be the very definition of fake news, because it turns out that Senator Booker's office had asked Bill Burke, who was a lawyer for George W. Bush, the former president, with whom Kavanaugh, in whose administration Kavanaugh worked, and they had asked if a number of documents, including the ones that Senator Booker so grandiosely waved around this morning, if they could be cleared for release. This is Bill Burke's statement. We cleared the documents last night, shortly after Senator Booker's staff asked us to. We were surprised to learn about Senator Booker's histrionics this morning because we had already told him he could use those documents publicly.
So it was Kabuki Theater this morning at the old Judiciary Committee.
It was something surreal, that's for sure.
Maybe it was a Spartacus moment. Maybe it was Burt Lancaster in that moment, because he definitely was acting the whole time.
This just adds to what we've been saying. This is Democratic Party theater. It's what it is. The cameras are rolling. They know the networks are covering this. And Senator Booker, and I'll say it again, the Democrat who would love to be the next president of the United States, he was trying to, I'm doing this for the American people. I'm breaking the rules despite the fact that I could be thrown out. Turns out, thank you, Steve, for this breaking news. Turns out he had permission to do this.
It was all agreed to beforehand.
Last night. I wonder if you'll see this on CNN tonight. Do you suppose they'll cover that part of it?
Nope.
Kind of now.
Fake news. Thank you, Steve.
You bet.
Appreciate it. As we continue to developing story or what? I tell you what.
That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing. I
misleading the American people.
Yeah.
Has to, he was ready to suffer the consequences when he was told hours before last night, we're releasing these. We're no longer considering them committee confidential. That stamp that's on them. He knew that going into the hearings this morning, but he decided on this big theatric with all of this. Is that the man you still want to be the next president of the United States? I'll leave that up to you. We were talking about, just before the break, we were talking about all the protesters that have been part of this Democratic Party theater at the hearings for Judge Kavanaugh. Well, it turns out that, and we shouldn't be surprised by this, that some of these protesters really aren't up on what they're protesting about. Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA, he was outside yesterday or the day before when these protests started to talk to some of these protesters about what they were protesting about, and we find out just exactly if they knew what they were protesting about. It's cut number 8.
What don't you like most about Kavanaugh?
I'm just here holding the sign.
I just want people to get out to vote during the midterms.
Civil rights and justice rights will also be rolled back at an even greater level than they are, and I think those concerns are valid and people are expressing their true fears. American rights are at stake if this guy gets put on.
There you have it. American rights, civil rights. What? Where's your proof for that? And I'm sure if you caught the first comment there, he was reading from the sign. Yeah. The protester was reading from somebody else. I don't know why I'm here, but that's what the sign says over there. Now, that's the depth of what we're talking about here. But it's all part of the theater. Again, that was orchestrated by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer in a phone call, an organizational phone call on Sunday night. That's not speculation, folk. That was admitted to by Senator Durbin on the first day of these hearings. This is what we're talking about. And I don't think it's an overstatement. As I said, I don't believe it's treason, but there is a treasonous type thinking in all of this. This is about a hatred for Donald Trump. This is about a hatred for conservative values on the part of the Democrats. They're at war. They believe they have to do all of this to take the country back. They want their values imposed on the American people. And they're going to do anything, say anything, and let's be very clear. They have the complete cooperation of the mainstream media.
Yeah.
There's
I think this brings us back to how you opened the show, that a lot of this doesn't make sense unless you look at it through a biblical worldview.
Mm-hmm.
It's a spiritual battle.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And speaking of the media, of course, the other big story today that continues to unfold is this editorial that ran in the New York Times yesterday, allegedly from a high-ranking official in the Trump administration. Now, here's what the Times had to say. The Times today, I'm referring to yesterday, Wednesday, is taking the rare step of publishing an anonymous op-ed essay. We have done so at the request of the author, a senior official in the Trump administration. Now, that's what they say. They believe that this person, senior official, Trump administration, whose identity is known to us and whose job would be jeopardized by its disclosure. Here's some of the things. To be clear, this author, to be clear, ours is not the popular resistance of the left. We want the administration to succeed and think that many of its policies have already made America safer and more prosperous. Wait a minute. But we believe our first duty is to this country, and the president continues to act in a manner that is detrimental to the health of our republic. What a contradiction. On one hand, they say things are really going well in this country. This president, now this is not what the op-ed says, this president has been faithful in carrying out everything that he promised during the election campaign. Nothing that he has done is a big surprise. His continued desire to build a wall on the southern border. His theme of Make America Great Again, and part of that is an economic policy. Part of that is redoing NAFTA. And by the way, he has a new deal with Mexico. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to work one out with Canada, but they're resisting at the moment. Tariffs. A fair deal on tariffs. But this editorial would lead you to believe, and they pretty well admit it, that there is a group of people inside the administration that is working to undermine the president. That's the thrust of this editorial.
That's treason, right?
That's what I would call it. It is treason. Now, and with the cooperation of the New York Times, they are willing to run this editorial from a person who is refusing to identify themselves. There's kind of an interesting, it's not the first time the New York Times has done this. And there's a piece in Town Hall today, and they make this point. It's not the first time that the New York Times has issued an editorial from an unnamed source, and that they ID'd the source as a very important person. This goes back a few years. This Town Hall article makes, when they were caught, the New York Times red-handed deceiving their readers in much the same way. In a lengthy anti-fracking article, fracking is a procedure used to get oil and gas out of the ground. In a lengthy anti-fracking article, they claim that senior industry experts and insiders believe the industry to be little more than a Ponzi scheme set up for failure. They even had the emails from a series of senior insiders where these doubts were expressed. According to the New York Times, one energy analyst wrote, "Am I just totally crazy, or does it seem like everyone and their mothers are endorsing shale gas without getting a really good understanding?" So they talk about federal analysts, senior people, the whole thing, but wait. It turns out the federal analyst, the energy analyst, and the officer turned out to be the same person who was actually an intern when he wrote the first email and an entry-level position when he wrote the other comments. There you have it.
There you go.
Fake news? The president is not exaggerating when he talks this way. So this president facing Democrats, facing the mainstream media, and they have one focus point, and that is to defeat this president, do anything possible, lie, distort, do everything possible to undermine his agenda. How's the president reacting to all of this? We'll talk about that when we come back after the break. You're listening to Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian. Back in a few moments.
AFR programming is now available on Alexa.
Alexa, play American Family Radio.
Welcome to the AFR Alexa skill.
Alexa, play the Today's Issues podcast from August 10th.
Do you want to play hour 1 or 2?
Hour 1.
This is Trivia Friday.
Click Just Ask Alexa at the bottom of the Alexa FAQ page at afr.net to get started. Then use Amazon Alexa to access the programming of American Family Radio.
Who is God? What's he like?
How can we know? Your answer to these questions will impact your worship, discipleship, apologetics, and evangelism. Learn from Ravi Zacharias, Josh McDowell, Chip Ingram, and more than 60 other speakers at Southern Evangelical Seminary's 25th Annual National Conference on Christian Apologetics. It's October 12th and 13th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Homeschool, skeptic, and group discounts are available. Pre-registration ends October 9th at ses.edu.
Len Ingram of Redeem Clean felt God call him to support the American Family Association.
I'm a laundryman. I'm the son of a laundryman, too. I love clean clothes. I love the business. I love everything about it. This project was built exclusively to support AFA and AFR. There's no strings attached. Another thing that I would like to see come out of this is that I would like to see other business people feel a calling to support ministries wherever and whatever they do to share the gospel of Jesus Christ.
In addition to your regular AFA giving, Redeem Clean Laundry Detergent allows you to increase your support of AFA just by continuing to wash your family's clothes. For clean laundry and support of a cleaner society, it's Redeem Clean. Learn more, find options, and get Redeem Clean products at afastore.net. That's afastore.net.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
And welcome back to Focal Point. Fred sitting in for Brian today. We're talking about a couple of major stories coming out of Washington, the ongoing hearings for Judge Brett Kavanaugh, which are continuing at this hour. Could wrap up tonight if they stay around until about midnight tonight, as they did last night. But I believe it's scheduled for 4 days. I think it'll make it out of hearings, the hearing itself. I don't imagine it'll be along party lines. The question will be what happens after that. By the way, and the other story has to do with the New York Times running this op-ed from the anonymous source who says he's a high-ranking official in the Trump administration. He and a bunch of others are working to undermine the president's agenda. How about that? Well, what is the president? How is he responding to all of these two happenings in Washington, D.C.? Well, tonight he's headed out to, I believe it is Billings, Montana. All right. And Billings, Montana is the home of one Democrat lawmaker, John Tester of Montana. And the president tomorrow will be going to North Dakota. That's the home of Senator Heidi Heitkamp. So how is he responding? He's going to hold rallies in their backyard. That's what he's going to do. And apply a little bit of pressure to those Democrat senators who are out there. It's very interesting. They're both facing, of course, re-election in November. But it's interesting. Tester unveiled a television ad yesterday promoting his collaboration with Trump as he seeks to inoculate himself against conservative critics. And Heitkamp is locked in a tough re-election fight in heavily Republican North Dakota, where she narrowly won 6 years ago and now faces a more formidable opponent in Congressman Kevin Cramer. So that's vintage President Trump right there. He is not going to let these kinds of things stop him. He has responses to these things. But he's going out, and he's going to be going to the home of these two red state Senate Democrats. He gets a great response at these rallies. You know, every time he's been on the road now for the last couple of months, a number of rallies. There's the same as 2016 during the election campaign. People can't wait to see him. And I think this is the thing that, I don't know if the Democrats are missing this or they're relying on the mainstream media coverage, but they're not fighting Donald Trump. They're fighting the American people who put him in office.
That's a good point.
He had over 300 electoral votes in 2016. And a lot of these senators who are up for re-election, these Democrat senators, they know that. So it's going to be interesting to see when the confirmation vote is finally held for Kavanaugh, if some Democrats cross the floor, or are they going to obey their boss, Chuck Schumer? We're also talking about this New York Times anonymous op-ed. The president, not shy about responding to these things, responded to that op-ed last night, cut one.
If the failing New York Times has an anonymous editorial, can you believe it? Anonymous, meaning gutless, a gutless editorial. We're doing a great job. When you tell me about some anonymous source within the administration, probably who's failing and probably here for all the wrong reasons, no. And the New York Times is failing. If I weren't here, I believe the New York Times probably wouldn't even exist.
So there you have it. You know, he's a rough, tough guy from the east side of New York. He is not a politician. And sometimes I think he almost thrives on this kind of thing. Not that he sets out to create it, but, you know, he's a smart guy. You know, yesterday we had Dr. Robert Jeffress, the First Baptist Dallas. He has a new book out, and he is an advisor to the president. And he has an interesting reflection on President Trump. He is this is according to Dr. Jeffress, he's a very thoughtful guy. He's very engaging when you have a one-on-one conversation with him. He wants to know the truth about things and is genuinely interested. And I'm thankful that that President Trump chose people like Pastor Jeffress. We know that Vice President Pence is a born-again evangelical Christian, that he has those people around him. And Vice President Pence is the type of individual, because I remember when he was governor of Indiana, he stood strong for Christian values at that time. I don't think Vice President Pence would hang around with a guy who's dishonest. You may not like some of the verbiage of President Donald Trump, and we can agree on that. We wish he would say things in a different way sometimes. As far as his background goes, that is in the past, and you know he'll have to stand before the Lord someday on those things, if he's guilty of the things that he's being charged with, and all of those. But Dr. Robert Jeffress knew right from the beginning that there was something about Donald Trump that was worth supporting. He said yesterday, again, in the interviews that he gave here when he was at American Family Radio talking about his new book, he said he knew right from the beginning that Donald Trump was the person needed to defeat the Democrats. And that's why Dr. Jeffress supported him. And there were, 17 people who wanted the nomination, something like that. Good people, like former governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, like Ted Cruz and others, who many Christians supported initially. But now we have a history of 2 years of Donald Trump. And I guess a year and a half, I should say, a year and a half of Donald Trump. And I think it's clear that he is a man who has stood by the promises that he made. One of the ones that I was most impressed about was his commitment to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
How many presidents have promised to do that and never did? But he did it, despite all the political opposition. You may not like his personality, but you cannot argue that he has stood by what he has promised to do. And unfortunately, you know, expectedly he would face opposition from Democrats, but many times the sad story is he faces opposition from members of his own party, his Republican Party. But he hasn't let that stop him either. I think you can say that he puts the American people first and abiding by his promises. But, you know, we are told in Scripture to pray for our leaders, and I think we need to pray constantly for President Donald Trump. that he would accept the advice of those Christians that he has appointed to be his advisors, and that he would listen to them. And most of all, pray. I don't know if he's asked Christ to be his Savior, but pray for his salvation if he has not. That is the most important thing above everything else in all of this. There is so much news going on today. I mentioned just a few moments ago, wanted to bring you up to date on a story that keeps getting lost, but it keeps coming back, fortunately. This is the shooting in July of last year, 2017, of the Australian woman up in Minneapolis.
Oh, by the policeman?
By the police officer, who is a Somali in background, right. This police officer. He has been charged with the death of this woman, Justine Damon. She had called the cops because she was living in Minneapolis at the time, called the cops because she thought she heard something going on in the alley outside her apartment. She goes out to talk to the police. This police officer is sitting in the passenger side of the police vehicle, and he shoots her. That's what we know of. Now, defense attorneys had filed a motion to dismiss the murder and manslaughter charges against Officer Noor. But in response yesterday, now listen to this, folks, the county prosecutor said officers who were training Noor reported instances in which he had problems handling the stress of the job and seemed unwilling to engage with people. In fact, just 2 months before the shooting of this woman, Noor pointed a gun at a motorist's head just 2 months before the shooting. Now, this story goes on, and it's an Associated Press story on onenewsnow.com. I'd like you to read it. Noor also took a psychological test in 2015, 2 years before this shooting incident, that showed he disliked being around people and had difficulty confronting others. Still, a psychiatrist found Noor was psychologically fit to work as a cadet officer. Here's the point in all of this to be considered, and it's not contained in this story. There are 100,000 Somali refugees that live in Minneapolis. I have no doubt the Minneapolis Police Department has a quota system for the kinds of people they want on the police force. Here is a Somali, he may be second generation, I'm not sure, living in the United States, or first generation. But despite the fact of all of this, 2 months before, pointing a gun at a motorist's head, 2 months before this incident of the shooting and killing of this Australian woman, despite all of the psychiatric examination which questioned his stability, didn't like dealing with people, the psychological evaluation said Noor was more likely than other officer candidates to become impatient with others over minor infractions, have trouble getting along with others, to be more demanding, and to have a limited social support network. All of that was known, but he was still in uniform. So, is this another case, a possible case where, in order to fill a slot that was designated perhaps for a minority, that they overlooked all of this, and that night he was in that police car and drew that gun on an unarmed woman who had called police because she was concerned about something that was going on. There'll be more to this story as it unfolds. It's a while before the court case actually goes to court. All right, been a pleasure to be with you today. Much more ahead here in American Family Radio. There's a lot of news. You'll hear it reported both on our programming and our newscasts throughout the day. Good to be with you. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian. We'll be back, Lord willing, again tomorrow right here on Focal Point. Bye for now.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Vice President Mike Pence called the Values Voter Summit the greatest gathering of conservative, pro-family Americans in the nation. The Values Voter Summit in Washington, D.C. is September 21st through the 23rd. Sponsored in part by AFA Action, the summit will encourage and equip you to preserve America's republic. Learn more and register at valuesvotersummit.org. That's valuesvotersummit.org.
This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.